gonna do a wrap-up video. I didn't film a vlog in the month of September. September was a really long, really hard, really gross month back to work. And I just didn't. I filmed like maybe 2 clips over the course of the month, and then I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna do an old school sit down, talk about what I read. And that actually meant that I had to wait a little bit until I hit a day where I could do that. I am late in putting this out, later than I would like to have been, but it has meant that I was able to finish 3 more books. No, 2 more books, and get very far in a third. So there are some books that I started in the month of September, but finished technically in the month of October. And there's one that I'm still reading in the month of October, but I'm more than halfway through, so I'm going to talk about those first. One is Black River Orchard by Chuck Wendig, which was so good. This is such a weird and wild book. It feels a little bit like a fable, or maybe a little folk horror, but not exactly folk horror. It follows multiple people, different sets of people, and the thing that brings them all together is this brand of apple. This very special, very evil, very scary brand of apple. And this is a great book, a really great book. It took me a really long time to finish it. It is long and wonderful and glorious with tiny little type and lots of pages, and I loved every second of it. It's also super floppy. I highly recommend the book, but I really loved this, and it took a commitment. It took me longer to read this than it took me to read this. Not all book lengths are created equal. Highly recommend this. I think this definitely solidifies Chuck Wendig as one of my favorite authors of all time. Yeah, I look forward to reading whatever he puts out next. Really, really excellent storytelling. Really excellent storytelling. And the ending is wonderful. I love Chuck Wendig's horror endings. They are the only ones that seem to satisfy me. So love it. I also was able to finish The Lays, I have to sneeze, The Lays of Marie de France. And these are short little fairy tales and poems and stories that might have been told at court for entertainment purposes. They are truly entertaining, wild, like unbelievable. They center a lot around love. So imagine them being like Netflix for the medieval period. These are the kinds of stories. These are the stories that would have been told by a professional storyteller to the lords and ladies, the kings and queens, the princes and the princesses in a court, and for entertainment. And they center around love, and a lot of them center around courtly love. So love that is impossible to come to fruition in a sanctified way. It might come to fruition, but it's star-crossed. It's not allowed. But most of these do not. Most of these are about, I love her and I can't have her, or I love him and I can't have him. There's a lot of really interesting characters, humans and animals and spirits and just all sorts of things in here. I highly recommend this if you enjoy reading fairy tales. They're not exactly fairy tales. They are tales of the court, but they veer into the realm of the impossible in really lovely ways. And I will definitely reread quite a few of these. Yeah, highly recommend if you are interested in fairy tales or fables. If you enjoy, let's say, Hans Christian Andersen or Angela Carter or King Arthur. Somewhere in the middle are the Lays. And then I also started, but have not finished yet, and will finish in October, Chains of Iron by Cassandra Clare, The Last Hours, Book 2 in the Shadowhunter novels. There's always so many words in this title. And I I am a chunk into it and loving it. The chapters in these are so long that it takes me a little bit of time to get into them, and I normally don't mind if chapters are long, but there are natural breaks where there should be a chapter break, but it just continues on and it throws me off, and I'm not sure why. But then I get into the rhythm of it. The pacing of these is not ideal. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The pacing of these novels is not ideal, and I've learned that it is just a Cassandra Clareism, like it's how she does it. And I'm learning to live with that because I really enjoy the story itself. This one is about I can't tell you too much because it picks up right where the first book like left off. But you've got a fake marriage between a girl who really loves her husband and a guy who also really loves his wife, but doesn't know he loves his wife and thinks that he loves this other woman who's really bad for him. Really bad for him. So it's like a new adult romance soap opera set in an alternative Victorian London where there's magic and mayhem, and I love it. I love it. It's totally my thing. So those are the books that I started in October, that I started in September and didn't finish until October, one of which I have not finished yet. Now for the books that I did finish within the month of September, and let me restock them so they're in the order of reading, which I think is kind of fun to track, like what chased what. And Lola has stolen my sock. And you gave it to Dobby? You gave the sock to Dobby? Dobby's free now. Lola, you gave the sock to Dobby, now Dobby's free. She literally just took a sock and laid it on her Dobby toy, and so now Dobby is free. Lola, you steal the sock? Lola steal the sock? Oh no! She stole the sock. She took it back from Dobby. I guess Dobby's not free anymore. That's not how it works. Dobby is free. I would show you Dobby, but he's surrounded by a box that she tore up and it looks really dirty, and I'm not going to show you. Okay, let's try this again. This is why I don't do sit down wrap-ups anymore. Okay, so I read Bear. And this takes place in a town on an island called Friday Harbor off the coast of Seattle, Washington. It's about two sisters, one of which drives the ferry. The other one has another job. I can't remember what her job is. And they are taking care of their mother who is dying. And they've always lived on the island, and the island is like one of those tourist traps. You know, people come there to, like I've gone there, people come there to have a little touristy day. There's a great little bookshop there. Like it's just kind of a tourist town, but it's on an island. And it's about halfway, if you're taking the ferry, in between the United States coastline and the Canadian coastline. So from Seattle to Victoria, BC. So if you're taking the ferry, they usually stop in Friday Harbor. And so one of these sisters drives a ferry or works on a ferry, and the other one does something on the land. I don't know what. I mean, if you read it, you'll know, but I don't remember. It's been a long time. And one day, the sister who who works on the ferry sees a bear, a black bear, swimming towards the shore. And this is an odd occurrence. It kind of weirds her out. She does call animal control, or no, she tells her sister. And then a day or two later, the bear shows up on their doorstep, and she calls animal control, and they're like, oh, this bear is migrating. Just leave it alone. It will keep going. It's not going to stay. But the bear does stay and wreaks quite a bit of havoc as one sister has sort of a spiritual experience with the bear and seeks out the bear and feeds the bear and talks to the bear and believes that the bear talks to her. And the other, through this relationship of her sister with the bear, begins to see holes and misunderstandings in the relationship she has had with herself, with her sister, with her mother, all these years, with the place that she lives. Feels very dissatisfied, has always felt very dissatisfied, but they had a plan, and now that plan, because of this bear, seems to be disrupted. A plan to get off the island once their mother passes away. And now that all seems to have been a lie or an illusion, and things start to fall apart. So it's how this bear comes into their lives and disrupts everything. Like, the bear is a type for like a tower sort of a situation where things are falling down and nothing will ever be the same because this bear has come to town. It is well written. It reads very quickly. I read it in one sitting and it felt impactful, but now a month later, I don't remember much about it beyond like the plot. And so I would say it was a good book, worth a read, but not a great book. Not a great book. I followed that up with a reread of The Raven Boys. I wanted to reread this series. I am rereading this series, but I wanted to reread it because I first encountered it on audio right in the beginning when we went into lockdown. I got all 4 books from the Libby app and listened to them, and they took me through like the first 8-ish days of being a teacher working on Zoom for the very first time and not knowing what to do, not knowing how to stop working, not knowing when all of this would end, how long we would have to maintain this for. It was a very crazy time, and I used this for balance. And I wanted to know if I loved it as much as I did because of the balance, or if it was a really great series. So I wanted to read it this time and instead of listening. And I read the first book, and I'm so happy to say that this is a really great series. It's so good. This is about Blue Sargent. She is a teenage girl, young adult, who lives in what is essentially a house that is a coven. It's a bunch of women who have powers. Her mother is a clairvoyant tarot card reader, and Blue herself is more like a conduit of energy. So she strengthens the energy of the women, or the gifts of the women in the house where she lives. But she herself doesn't have any special gifts. Well, I guess that is a special gift, but she herself is not clairvoyant or anything like that. Every year on a certain night, she goes with one of these women. I think it's her aunt, but I could be wrong. She goes with one of these women to sit in the graveyard to see the ghosts of the people who will die in the coming year walk through the graveyard. They're not dead yet, but they're going to die, and their spirits walk through, and she goes so that she can strengthen the sight of the woman who sees them. But this year is different because she herself sees a boy. Now, Blue also has I don't want to say a curse. It's been foretold that when Blue falls in love and has her first kiss with the boy she loves, or the man she loves, whenever it happens, he'll die. And so she just kind of lives a life where she has always known that whoever she loves is going to die. And she doesn't actively seek love. In fact, she kind of pushes it away. Not in a conscious way, but just in a what's the point kind of way, because if I fall in love, the person's gonna die. But she sees this spirit, and so that's important. That's important. And then she meets these 4 guys who go to the kind of preppy private boys' school in the town, and she doesn't like the people who go to this school because they're kind of rich and full of themselves and not down to earth at all, and she is the exact opposite of all these things. And of course, she gets caught up in them because they are more than they appear. They are much more than they appear. And in fact, one of these boys is the boy she saw the spirit of. And this is such a great series, and I highly recommend that you pick it up, especially in like the fall, the spooky season. It's great. The next thing I picked up was a novel love story. I actually tabbed bunches of this. This is a magical realism romance. In it, you have, what's her name? Elsie Merriweather. And she fell in love with a romance series, kind of like a cozy romance series, which will never be completed because the author passed away before the last book in the series could be written, and she didn't leave any notes or anything behind. And so there are just a million cliffhangers. And so what was just kind of a run-of-the-mill long series of cozy romance mysteries becomes iconic because people read it and then they try and make their own ending to this series. And she joins a book group that is devoted to the series, that loves the series, that talks about theories about the series. And on her way to the book group, her car breaks down in a small town, which happens to be the town in which the books take place, the fictional town in which the books take place. And there's a character there, or there's a man there who is not a character from the books. He runs a little bookstore, and of course, this is going to be the love interest. There are some quotes in here that I tabbed a million things. I won't read a million things, but there are definitely some quotes in here. For a very long time, it had been Prue and me talking about books we read together. So I didn't think how different it would be to be part of a group that was just as unapologetically enthusiastic. I didn't know it then, but it would sate a part of my soul that had been thirsty for connection, for community for so long. I had forgotten to water it. I had forgotten that in it, joy could bloom. So just talking about like a book community and the power of a book community. Here's another one about book community. It's hard to explain to someone who doesn't read or who has never felt their heart bend so strongly toward a story that it might just snap in two. Some books are a comfort, some a reprieve, others a vacation, a lesson, a heartbreak. I had met countless stories by the time I read a book that changed my life. Love it. Absolutely love it. Then as I get deeper into the book, they become more about love and romance. I won't read all the ones about romance, but they're all good. I promise you that. Why are you so thoughtful? You shouldn't be so thoughtful, I croaked, because I hadn't expected this at all. I had gone through so much of my life filling wants and needs for other people. I didn't. It was thoughtful, and I was thankful. They're so cheesy taken out of context, but they're so sweet within context. But here's another one. Your hands are gentle and cold. You use them a lot, but no one ever holds them to keep them warm. Again, super cheesy, but also really lovely within the context, which I can't read you because it would give too much away. Love wasn't a trap, something you had to crawl out of later. If you loved something or someone, sometimes you had to let it go. And if they loved you, they would come back. Love always came back. There's a great quote that I can't read you because it would give way too much away. Love was patient and meticulous. Yes? Yes, my love? Down, please. Love was patient and meticulous, and it never ceased to surprise me. It wasn't something that I needed, something that I deserved, that I was worthy of. Love was what I wanted. Blank was who I wanted. For now, for a day, for a week, for years, a story written in the language of kisses and read to me in sweet, soft sighs. And though I didn't know the ending, I didn't need to, because this was enough. So lovely. It's so lovely. It's a lovely little book. This was my first Ashley Poston, and I'm not going to go back and read her backlist. I don't know that I love her writing so much that I want to do that, but I will definitely look at what she puts out next. This is very lighthearted, very silly, very, I hate to say it, but just a romance. You know, it's not full of a lot of depth, but there's definitely sweet moments. There's definitely lovely lines, pretty writing. It's the kind of writing where you feel like she had a line and she built a whole chapter around it, which sometimes bothers me, but it worked for a novel love story just because I really liked those two characters so much. Oh dear. The next book I picked up was this little ancient tome. Dorothy Eden's An Afternoon Walk. I'd never read anything by Dorothy Eden. I didn't know what this book was about. On the back, it didn't have a synopsis, but it had like a conversation, an excerpt from the text. This is, and I love this cover so much. I love it. Look how creepy the little girl's face is. Like, why are the necklaces blowing and the coat blowing, but not the sleeve? Like, I love it so much. This is a mystery. Ooh, I just dropped it. This is a mystery. And it is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It is the most misogynistic piece of literature that I've read in a really long time. Literature is a really big word for this book. Okay, so I loved this and I hated it all at the same time. I loved it because, wow, what a time capsule back to like when I was a child. Too young to remember anything, but like this is what I was born into here. The world I was born into. This is about a woman who is out walking in the fields behind her home in England, and she stumbles upon an abandoned country house with her young daughter, her 6 or 7-year-old daughter. And they're talking about her daughter's friend, who you don't know for a while if they're an imaginary friend or a real friend. And they stumble upon this house. It is obviously abandoned. There is a garden. They start to pick flowers to bring home because the father has been away on a business trip and he's coming back. And they're going to give him a bouquet, but he really hates it when they pick the flowers that he's grown in their own garden, and he also doesn't want them to spend money. And so she's very excited because she can pick these flowers and have something lovely for him when he returns that won't upset him. And so they're picking flowers, and she's telling her daughter a story about the people who must have lived in the house. And the further along she tells the story, the kind of creepier it gets, with an overbearing father and like forced marriage. And she just tells this really elaborate story that she's totally making up. But she kind of starts to believe it a little bit, like maybe the ghosts or the spirits of the place are communicating the true story to her. And then all of a sudden you hear this scream, which turns out to be an owl that flies out of the attic window. It freaks them out, and they walk home with their flowers. All of this happens in the first couple of pages of the book. I've spoiled nothing at this point. They get home, and the father arrives, and he's like all over the place. Gets some phone call that disturbs him. He leaves, says it's a business thing. He's got to take care of some business stuff. He comes back. She's closing up the house downstairs. And when she gets upstairs, he's like, wow, why did that take you hours? And she's like, it took me minutes. And thus the gaslighting begins. He starts to try and convince her that she's losing her mind, the basis of which he builds upon the fact that she had a miscarriage recently. And this obviously drove her crazy. So he thinks that she's losing her mind, or he tries to convince her that she's losing her mind. He also talks a lot about how their daughter is blonde and pretty, and therefore people will try to kidnap her. This is a huge conversation that happens many times in the book. Lo and behold, the daughter gets kidnapped with her little friend. There's a lot of things that happen in the book that lead you to a not supernatural conclusion, but that feel a little bit supernatural as you're reading, which is fun. But you have to wade through all of this misogyny. This whole story is only possible because of how little free agency women have in this moment in time. Yes, the book is calling that out, but also it fully embraces it in all the side characters and everything too. The way that the police believe the husband when he's like, oh, don't listen to her, she makes things up. That's not a red flag to them in any way during a part of this story. It's just a very different world. And because of the nature of the story and the fact that the husband is trying to establish that his wife is insane for reasons, it feels very in your face. And I think it would feel in your face anyway, but it feels very in your face. And so it was an interesting experience reading this book. Again, the entire story only happens because the husband is so domineering and stupid. The wife does make good decisions for herself and her daughter by the end. If it's a book that you would like to give a try, if you like books written, like mystery books written in the early 1970s, early 1970s, you might enjoy this. It is infuriating at times and also not very subtle. You know exactly what's going on. I don't think you're supposed to, but you do. Yeah, it was not terrible. It was not a terrible experience, but it is a terrible book. I am weirdly glad that I read it though. Weirdly glad. Okay, then I picked up this book. This book is so far outside of my comfort zone, so far outside of anything that I have read, but I got it from Book of the Month. I took a risk and it was one of my favorite reading experiences. But before I show you this book, I have to say I am not widely recommending this book because I know a lot of the people who watch my channel will not be okay with this book. So I do not recommend this book, but if you would like a fun, weird love story, it is a supernatural romance fantasy, I think is what it would be labeled under. It is quite steamy. You can skip the steamy parts. There are some conversations that happen that will be helpful, but they're not vital. So you can totally skip them if you want a fun book to read during spooky season. It is not well written, but the romance was great. I don't know. It's so I say that, but it's a romance between like a spirit who's fully embodied. It's like a person, and but can pop in and out at will and can manipulate things and move people without effort. And it's a spirit. And a necromancer, a girl who is a necromancer. So at the beginning of the book, I am talking about Fantasma. I forgot to tell you. At the beginning of the book, two sisters lose their mother, who is a necromancer, and in their family, when the main necromancer dies, the next oldest daughter, I guess, takes the place. There's a lot of time spent establishing this, and it's not super important. Like, I don't know why she couldn't have just been a necromancer. There's a lot of things. It's not a great story. Oh, it's not well written, right? Like, there's a lot of things in here that are like, well, why did we spend 40 pages establishing that and then never go back to why it's important? But we don't take time to actually set the rules for the magic in this system. Instead, we rely a whole lot on, oh, did I forget to tell you, reader, that they can do this? So it's really poorly written, but also incredibly voraciously readable. So if you are interested in reading about a young adult necromancer chasing her sister through a devil mansion to win a Hunger Games type competition so that she can get to the end and make a wish and also save her sister, while falling in love with the one person or thing she shouldn't fall in love with, this may be the book for you. I know there are probably a million books out there in the world like this. I have never read a one of them. No, this is the first one that I read. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's something that I will go to a lot, but it was so different from everything else that I've read, and I couldn't put it down. Again, it is terrible, terrible writing, and yet also strangely compelling. So again, if it sounds, it's not that scary. There are some like jump scare type things. It's not that scary. So if you are looking for something to like tuck into that's going to have just a really great romance, star-crossed lovers type of romance, fated souls type of romance, definitely fated souls type of romance. If you are interested in reading that with lots of like fun banter, but also moments of action and adventure as this main character, what is her name? Ophilia? Yeah. When Ophilia has to like complete these different challenges at these different levels to get to the end of the game. So there's action, there's adventure, there's a lot of killing. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of ghosts and goblins and ghouls and bloody bathtubs and stuff like that. Like, if you like Crimson Tide, if you like the movie Crimson Tide, I think you might like this book. It was fun. Very fun. Not great literature. Not a genre I'm going to read on the regular, but it was a really fun like palate cleanser and a really fun departure from what I normally read. And the romance was really sweet, like weirdly sweet. I went from there to something much more tame. I read Given Our History with all the fall vibes on the cover here. I read this so fast. This is a romance. It's a second chance romance between two people who met at a summer camp when they were kids, and then they hit it off and they continued to build a friendship long distance through sending each other mixtapes, burned CDs of songs and books. And she is a history buff when she's a kid, and she gets him involved in history, and he's a music buff when he's a kid, and he gets her involved in music. And some things happen. They end their friendship. It's a friendship that goes on for a really long time. They end their friendship many years. I think like a decade goes by. They don't see each other at all. They run into each other briefly and then leave just as briefly because he's in a relationship and she still likes him. And then she finds out that they're both professors. She finds out that she's about to get a new office mate for just one term because somebody is coming from another university to teach a special class for one term. And lo and behold, of course, it's him. And so now they have to share this office. They have to face each other. They have to talk to each other. These are two people who had been best friends for more than half their life. And then hadn't seen each other for another third of it. And then they have to talk to each other, have to figure things out, have to make some decisions. And it's just really beautiful. It's a really, really sweet, fun, easy to read, open door, not closed door romance. And I do recommend it. I do recommend it. Even if you prefer not to have intimate scenes in your books, easy to skip over. Easy to skip to get the rest of the story. So unlike Fantasma, I would recommend Any Given Day to anybody who watches my channel. Then I read a book which is such a great book. Oh my goodness. The storytelling in this, the way this is written, it makes me want to go back and read everything this author has ever written. This was my first book read by T. Kingfisher, and I do know that T. Kingfisher is a staple in the booktube community. I have never read anything until I read A Sorceress Comes to call, and this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. The writing in this is tremendous. This was so good. I loved this story so much. This is about a young girl who is growing up in a very mentally and emotionally abusive home, a single mother in like a fairy tale type land. This mother has magical powers. Her only friend, the girl's only friend, is a horse, and that she tries to make friends with other people, but the mother really doesn't want her to make friends with people, really doesn't want her to be normal or to have a life of her own. It's a very strange growing up. There are no doors on, or no locks on any of the doors. Like, it's a home without doors. They're not allowed to have doors closed because the mother doesn't want anything happening in secret that she doesn't know about. But she's also a very powerful sorceress, hidden in a time when it's not okay to be a sorcerer or a sorceress. And so she doesn't want to be called out. But more than that, she doesn't want other higher level sorcerers and sorceresses to know that she's around, because she wants to run her own games. So she uses her skills to manipulate their place in society. She decides that they need to get a man in their life who they can then get rid of and inherit all of his money and estate. She picks a target, starts to make it happen, gets them moved into his home. But what the mother doesn't account for is that his elderly sister with bad knees is very intelligent and cunning and has the wherewithal and the found family to protect not only her brother, but the sorceress's daughter from these schemes and terrors. It does get very dark and scary at the last third or fourth of the book. If you are in any way squeamish about anything scary, I would not read this book. But it was like, if you can watch Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, I think you'll be okay. But it reminded me a lot of the imagery in that. So it is scary, but really good. So good. The writing in this is just phenomenal. You feel like you are reading a fairy tale. I just want to read you just a little bit, just a little excerpt. And I don't know if everything I don't know if everything that T. Kingfisher writes reads like this, but if it does, I will be reading a lot more of T. Kingfisher. There was oh no, let's not start there because that's too hard to explain what's happening. So Hester is the name of the target's sister. She's an older woman who you might overlook, but she's very, very insightful and very aware and very intelligent and very well positioned in that she has friends, really good friends who will do anything for her. Friends with some power and influence in the world. And this is the beginning of chapter 4. She refers to the sorceress, who does have a name in the book, but she refers to the sorceress as Doom, D-O-O-M. 3 days after her first panic-filled awakening, Doom appeared on Hester's doorstep in the shape of a woman. Doom was tall and slender with a sort of figure that poets describe as willowy. She had shining dark chestnut hair and large blue eyes in a fragile heart-shaped face, and she held the squire's arm as if she were too delicate to stand unassisted. Hester noted dispassionately that Doom was beautiful. Hester was not envious, but beauty was a weapon that she did not wield herself, and it was not an insignificant one in the arsenal. Her brother was particularly susceptible to it, and even more susceptible to fragility. "My sister, Hester," the squire was saying, gesturing to her. "Hester, love, meet our guest, Miss Evangeline." "Oh, no," said Doom. "It's Lady, I'm afraid." When the squire tensed, she added artlessly, "Not that there has been a Lord Evangeline for a long time, I fear." Hester's brother relaxed and patted the hand tucked into his arm. Hester did not roll her eyes, but she considered it. This is a great book. does get scary, but this is a great, great book. And then I spent most of my reading month trying to make my way through this chunker of an epic. This is Stephen King's 11/22/63, and I really enjoyed this. It is not my favorite Stephen King, but I really enjoyed this. I do feel like this is unnecessary. There are so many. So it's about time travel. It's about more than that, but it's about time travel. And there are so many different ways that different people's stories play out based on the decisions that people make. And then some of these characters, after you get multiple like possible storylines, you just drop them and you never find out what happens to them. Side characters get multiple re-looks at their life. This is just Stephen King gone wild. Like, when you're Stephen King, I understand. You don't require an editor because you're Stephen King, right? But oh my word, this book needed editing, not only to figure out like what darlings to kill, but also to make sure that there aren't huge holes left in the story. There are huge holes left about characters in here. He focuses so entirely on certain characters that just don't get completion. And that bothers me. But overall, the overarching story is very compelling and very interesting. Well done. Once again, the ending, not great. I really feel like Stephen King endings are never great. But this was one of the better ones, for sure. This was definitely one of the better ones. It's hard for me to tell you what this book is about because it is about so many things. It starts with a community college teacher who teaches writing, or maybe he's a high school teacher who teaches writing, and he reads an essay by a janitor about how his father murdered everyone in their family but him when he was a child, and the impact that this had on him. And shortly after that, this same teacher is talking to a friend who shows him that in his pantry, if you go through this door and you keep walking, you'll end up in 1958, I believe. Anyway, you always end up back in the same spot, in the same town, at the same time, with the same things happening. And when you go back in time and you live things out, it's a very short amount of time in your time period. But the guy, I mean, one of the things that he wants to do is to make sure that this janitor, that his family isn't murdered, and goes to great lengths. But for example, one of the things that he learns is that it's not necessarily a good thing for the family to not be murdered. There's a lot of questioning about choice in this book and the impact of choice. There is some romance, but this is a time travel book. It's not going to work out the way you want it to. There's also this drive to like prevent JFK's assassination and the impact. So if the impact of this boy's family not dying can be so catastrophically, can cause such catastrophic difference for himself and others, what would be the difference that would be caused by changing the assassination of JFK? So it is looking at like the big and the small impact of choice, or the choices of big and small. No, it's looking at, how do I want to say it? The impact of choices on powerful and less powerful storylines, but it's kind of showing you that all storylines are powerful. All choices are powerful, what we feel in isolation without the context of everything, like all the unknowable everything, what we feel is bad without that context is not necessarily always the worst choice, even though it feels like the worst choice. So it is a very compelling and interesting philosophical read. It is also Stephen King, so it reads pretty easily, but there is no excuse for this, Mr. King. There's no excuse for the length of this book. That's it. That's what I read. I read 11 books in a month and a week. 11 and a half books in a month and a week. And I feel good about them. That was a very good reading month. Not a lot, but it was definitely the hardest month of the year that I've lived thus far, real life-wise. So I am going to call that a huge success. Strange little array of books, but mostly just a joy to read. It's not often that I can hold them all up at once anymore because I don't really read in that way anymore, or talk about in that way anymore. I am, because it is Voctober. I am, because it is Victober, aiming to do a vlog style like I have been doing all year. I just couldn't manage it in September. I just couldn't. So that's it for now. Let's go read.